Welcome back to Legacy Leaders, where we talk about the raw side of leadership, the mindset, the struggle, and the growth that builds true leadership. Today, we're talking about something most leaders don't like to admit: the silent battles, the pressure, the loneliness, the moments when you have to keep leading, even when you're breaking inside. People see the wins, the decisions, the confidence, but they don't see that weight that comes with the leadership. It's a big topic, bro. I listened to a podcast earlier and kind of hit it. That's a topic that felt like it's much needed. Everybody sees the wins, but nobody sees the struggle. Nobody sees what you actually had to do to get to where you wanted to be. Examples: Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan. No one saw those struggles. No one seen those 4 a.m. workouts Kobe was doing, going home with his kids, taking them to school, going back and working out. What do you think about this?
That's why you see a lot of famous athletes and Hollywood stars and stuff like that. They crash out, they burn out because there is an ugly side to success. There is an ugly side to fame. There's a lot of pressure. One of the biggest examples I can think of off the top of my mind is Deion Sanders. He's open. He talks about it all the time. We've talked about this in other episodes. Deion Sanders had everything. He had the money, the cars, the fame, the houses, the girls, the parties. He had everything you could ask for that money could buy. But he couldn't find happiness. He was doing drugs, he's drinking, he's out trying to find that void or trying to fill that void, but he couldn't until he found Jesus. And the faith is really what kind of pulled him from the gutters and pulled him from that negative mentality that he had. So the good, the bad, the ugly. A lot of times we talk about the good, sometimes we talk about the bad, but we don't get down into the nitty gritty about the ugly. And a lot of that has to do with the stigma of, oh, men got to be so strong, men got to be silent, men are the providers. What about your heart? What about your feelings? What about your mind? We all go through that. I know you personally. We've been together for 7, 8 years. Like doing this thing, doing our career, doing work, talking about leadership, talking about different things as far as success in life. And, you've had your mental battles. We talked about it in the episode where I was interviewing you and what you went through personally, and how dark and deep it got for you when you had that car accident, you had a bag on your side, and I talked a little bit through my story about how dark it got for me when Annie was diagnosed with cancer and thinking things in my mind like, what's going to happen? Am I going to be a single father of 4 kids? Is my wife going to pass away? Is she going to be okay? You hit a deep depression like that, man. It's hard to kick out of for sure. But everybody sees the outside looking in. It's like, oh, Ben's so strong, or Juan's so strong. How's he do it? How's he work with a bag on his side? Or how's Ben coming to work every day when his wife's at home, diagnosed with a severe disease that could kill her?
Yep.
So
Most definitely, it's something that most people. It's what is that saying? The grass is greener on the other side, but people don't
yeah,
see that we're out here watering our grass every single day and doing what we had to do, even when we didn't even feel like it. Maybe we were going through battles. There was times where I was at work. I would get a phone call. You remember? I'll get phone calls that my dad was sick and. He was in the hospital. He's in Mexico, so it's hard for me to try working through it and in my head going through that battle. Is my dad okay? Is my dad gonna get better? And having to work through it. Not everybody would tell me go home, go home. Like no, no, no. I go home. What's gonna happen? It's gonna kick in even more, and I'm just gonna be there thinking, and I was like, I'd rather be at work, keep on doing what I got to do, and keep my mind off of it. But a lot of people don't see those struggles. They only see the success. They see the good and not the bad, like you just
yeah.
said. And it's a lot of people don't understand it until it actually happens to them. And let's talk about a little topic. Why do leaders often hide the struggles? That's a good thing. And you just said it right now. As men, we were taught not to talk about our feelings and not talk about how life's going and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And holding all that in. It's it firsthand. You've seen it with me. I would hold everything in, and you hold everything in, and eventually it's a ticking time bomb. You're gonna blow up, and you're gonna blow up
Yeah.
on the wrong person instead of actually letting it out, letting it go. Learning to let go is the biggest issue. Learning to let go and understand
Yeah.
that none of us are perfect. We're humans. We're gonna make mistakes. We're gonna go through things, but understanding that at the end of the day, life continues and life is gonna get better. But what do you think about that?
I think one of the hardest things for us to do as leaders is admit that we're vulnerable. Vulnerability is the hardest thing to show, especially in a leadership role, because you want everybody to see you as strong and successful and powerful, and that you've got your shit collected, right? So when you're in that position, it's hard for any leader, whether it's work, whether it's family. As a father, it's hard for me to let my kids know I'm struggling, right? I don't want them to know I'm struggling. I don't want my wife to know I'm struggling. So I carry that baggage, right? At work, same thing. If you're getting your butt kicked at work or something's going on at work, you don't want your team to notice, because you don't want to. So goes the leader, so goes the rest. We've talked about that before. So if you come in and you're having a bad day, everyone else around you is going to have a bad day. So the stigmatism that is there as far as men shouldn't have mental health, or we should always be happy or always provided and we should be strong and not show feelings, I think it comes with a detriment to our physical health too. Now, not just the mental health, but the physical health, because you start going through those depression and you start eating wrong, right? You start finding other vices, whether you're smoking or drinking, right? Instead of going to the gym, you're finding other things to do. So I think to start attacking the mental health, one, we got to break the stigmatism. So we got to be able to break down those walls, be vulnerable with people we're close to, or be honest with our team, whether it's our team at work or our spouse or our kids, and really just break down that vulnerability and say, hey, I'm struggling. Like my head right now is wrong, right? But one thing my dad taught me personally as a young kid, and still to this day, I thank him. And it's funny because actually one of the guys that you were listening to on that podcast earlier, he's one of the guys that got me back into church. So my guy Patrick, he got me back into church, man, and that was a huge help for me in my life because that's when I was going through some pretty dark stuff. So when you can't talk to your family, you can't talk to your kids, you can't talk to your wife, turn it upstairs, man. Talk to the man upstairs, talk to God, because just getting that out off your chest, whether it's in prayer, meditation, going to church, whatever, that helps you with your mental health. You can release that, give it to a higher power. That way you can get that anxiety off your chest, and I don't think we talk about that enough. And so really, goes back to, like I said, with Deion Sanders, he went and found Jesus. So, and I'm not saying Jesus is end all be all for everybody, right? Like your beliefs and my beliefs, we believe in the same thing. So it's easy for us to talk about, but you have to be able to break that stigmatism down no matter what your faith is, what your religion is. So it's really about being vulnerable and having those conversations. We have had a previous episode, those courageous conversations. That starts with vulnerability, starts with trust, and that's what really kind of will help break the stigmatism if you got a close circle. We also talk about how you are who you hang out with, so if I can get real vulnerable with you, right? Like I know you can get vulnerable with me. We've had some very deep conversations about family, about health, about career, about success, about troubles with opportunities. And so if you got those close people in your life, I find it's easier to get away from that stigmatism and be able to talk about that mental health. And bros need bros, like you need to be able to have that conversation honest and real and raw with other bros. It's not something you can go and discuss with your wife because they just don't understand it. They don't get the pressure that's put on men, right? You can't go to your mom and say, hey mom, I got something to talk about, because she's going to listen to you. She's your mama. She's going to love you no matter what. She's going to love you unconditionally. That's your mom. But she's not going to understand. She's not going to get it from a male's perspective and a man's perspective on what's going on. Now, can they relate? Absolutely. Because women have different obstacles than we do, right? Like they're having to be out there working at the same time as taking care of the home and providing for kids at home, where men can go out there and we can focus on providing. We go and do our thing, when the women have it both ways nowadays, because it's not very often you see a single household income. Usually the women have to work and they're holding the house down. They're the gangsters, but at the same time, it's like men have a different stigmatism. Women can talk, women can cry, women can let it out, women can, lean on your shoulder, right? But we don't go to our women and sit there and cry, put our head on their shoulder, or, it's just not something we do, man. We were raised not to, show weakness and vulnerability, because people take advantage of the weakness and people take advantage of the vulnerability, so that's kind of where it starts for me, man, as far as breaking that stigmatism.
And you're right. I'll talk a little quick story about it. I've talked about this person. This hidden person that shown me a lot. He's a person that helped me open up a little more. And learning to let go and like you just said, talk to the man up above when I don't got no one else to talk to. But being able to talk to him, I would always go over to his station, and people would always wonder why I'm over there for an hour just I'll go in early on my day off, and I'll just go hang out with them and have a conversation because I could let it out. You know, those battles I was struggling with, I could go have that conversation with them, and he's not judging. He just wants me to let it go. He wants to just let it all out so I can feel better. You know, and vice versa. You know, he would talk to me and tell me stuff, and we'll just be moments where we'll shed a tear together while we're working and cutting meat together. You know, a tear comes down, and while we're like still working, but we're letting it out. You know, it's something that, like you just said, it's something that we were shown. You know, probably
Yeah.
generations. You know, my Mexican old style generation where I never see my dad cry. I never see my dad, you know, give up. None of that. You know, so in my mind is I gotta stay strong and I gotta keep on going. And you know, I never see my dad do it, so you know what, I got to hold everything in. But realistically, we hold everything in. Like I said, eventually everything's gonna come out. You know. But
Yeah.
let's talk about what's one silent battle you faced that taught you something powerful.
You know, silent battles can come in different forms. You know, it can come in forms of depression on the monotony. You know, we talked about in previous episodes about hitting plateaus at work. You know, like I said, when I'm down, I'm like I kick my shit into another gear because I'm like, man, I got to get out of this rut. You know, when I'm on the high, I'm living great. So, but that monotony and those plateaus where I'm just kind of coasting, like I'm not doing great, but I'm not doing bad. That's where my depression kicks in because I feel like I'm not achieving anything. I'm not reaching for more, you know. And then I start to think about my own ambition as a man. Am I doing enough? Am I good enough? And that's where it comes back to that chip on my shoulder that I've lived with my whole life. As soon as my mom left, is am I good enough? Or, you know, am I doing enough for people to stick around? Am I being characterized for my work ethic? Am I being characterized for my personality? You know, and so that's the things that I face is not just, it's not really about what people think about me. You know, it's about what I think about myself. And that's what I really face. You know, am I doing enough? You know, we talked very first episode, you asked me that question, right? What's one quote you live by? And, you know, I told you, I was like, I get up and I ask myself every single day, am I better today than I was yesterday? So if I can't look in the mirror and say yes to that question, you know, okay, if it's today and I say, nah, today I kind of suck, tomorrow I'm going to hit it, right? So I get up tomorrow. If I start stringing those negative days together, that's when it really starts getting me. I'm like, damn, I'm terrible today. Like, this sucks, you know? Outside influences, we talked about the noise, other
Yep.
people. You know, I think that I'm an empath by nature. You know, I take on other people's pain, heartache, happiness, whatever it is, right? By nature, I'm that guy. I got a big heart, you know, and so other people's depression sometimes will pull me down, you
Yeah.
know. So it's about trying to learn how to have those conversations and lead people out of their depression as well. You know, I might be close to something. It could be my wife having an off day, and then I'm like, man, I'm having a bad day too. She's having a bad day. It could be someone at work having a rough day, you know. It's funny because I was talking to my daughter this morning. And actually, it's funny we have this episode tonight because you know she started talking about emotions and talking to Jesus and praying and stuff like that. She said, "How come I never see you cry?" You know, and I was like, "Ooh, that's a stinger," you know. And she's like, "I've only seen you cry twice ever." You know, my daughter's 9 years old. She's seen me cry twice in 9 years. That's not a good track record, right?
Oh yeah.
And so I said, "Oh yeah, when was that?" You know, and she told me when my grandpa Steve passed away. She saw me cry for that, you know, because my grandpa was very instrumental in my upbringing and making me the character I am today, the man I am today, as far as faith and family and stuff like that. So that one hit me hard, you know. And then the other one was earlier this year, had nothing to do with my family or anything. You know, I had a lady at work, you know, she had a heart attack right there at work, right? And I was administering CPR. I was trying to save this lady's life, and she didn't make it. She passed away. You know, so I told everyone at work, like, hey, I gotta go. I went to the hospital, right? Tried to meet with the family. I didn't know she passed away yet. I was waiting for her, waiting for the news. Finally, the family came out, you know, told me she passed away. And that hit me hard, man, you know, because I tried to save her life and I couldn't. You know, it wasn't about not acting. It was just about physically, it was her time to go. God called her home. There's a reason for that. But, you know, instrumentally in my life, that messed me up. You know, for a couple of days, man, I was pretty messed up on that shit. And like I said, everybody, that stigma, like everyone wants to be strong. You know, a lot of people would go about it like, oh man, what do you care? You don't know her. Like
Yeah.
it was her time, you know, and they write that off. But again, I'm an empath, you know, so I feel deeply for her family who was celebrating her son's birthday. You know,
Yeah.
so every year on that boy's birthday, on his birthday, he's gonna remember his mom had a heart attack. You know, and so I still talk to the family today. To be honest with you, I was texting them earlier this week, like, hey, just checking in, man. Marcus, how you doing, brother? Are you doing all right, man? How's your family doing? How's dad doing? How's Aaron doing? But to think about this conversation we're having now on a podcast and talking to my daughter and thinking about the stigmatism from men, right? That, I've never seen you cry, and I've broken down twice in 9 years. That's not a good track record. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
So we got to show our kids better. We got to get vulnerable. We got to connect with them and be able to say, hey, dad's not doing good. Here's what's on my mind.
Yep.
And sometimes you just need a hug from your kids, man, and your whole day's better. Or from your mama or whatever, whoever your person is, with your girlfriend, spouse, or brother. Sometimes just a friend, man, saying, hey, man, I love you, bro. It doesn't have to be no homo, but I love you, bro.
Yeah,
So,
true facts right there. Sometimes, it's just much needed, letting it out. But it's those silent battles is it's a big thing. Like I said, we're all trying to hold things in and realizing that sometimes you don't gotta hold it in. We can let it out. There's one thing that it always sticks in my head that you told me. He's like, who you gotta prove? Who do you gotta prove that you're gangster, bro? Who's out there with you when you were doing your work? He's like, you ain't gotta prove to no one who you are and what you stand
yeah.
for. But when things get real, he's like, they'll see it. I'll smack someone. Like, and that to me kind of stuck with me. Being that's a battle that we face. We're trying to, and it kind of leads up to the next question. That I kind of feel like, what's one expectation you place on yourself that became too heavy to carry?
Man, honestly, something that's too heavy for me to carry would probably be like when my wife had cancer. That was hard for me to carry, especially as a caretaker role, right? Like, I'm a strong, independent man. I can't do anything about that, right? Like, I'm not a doctor. I don't know how to administer chemo. I can't do anything to make her feel better. I can't help her keep hair. I can't help her, so that situation, man, was dark. But being the rock of the family at the time, like, I had to be the one that stepped it up, for my kids. I had to step it up for her. I couldn't show that weakness, because if I'm vulnerable and I'm the rock in the family, that means everybody else is gonna be vulnerable. So that was hard, man. That was a heavy weight for me to carry, for sure. But at the end of the day, I think that it was good because it made us stronger. She saw through thick and thin, like, my ass is gonna be there. I'm gonna show up. I'm gonna make every appointment. I'm gonna do what I gotta do. Like, work is not important now. Work has always been important. That pays my bills. But when I was dropping work and everything else in my life, like, nope, sorry, don't got time. I'm going to the doctor with my wife. I put her first, and I think that was a message to her, and showed her that, hey, these vows when I married you meant something. It's not just when it's convenient for me. It's in sickness and in health, right? It's in life or death. And I made those vows, and I think that it was a heavy weight to carry, man, but I'll carry it again. And honestly, I wish it was me that had it instead of her. You know what I mean? I think that every caretaker goes through that too if you're in a situation like that. Especially if you're an empath like me and you take on people's feelings and take on people's passion and everything like that. It makes it tough. So I think I carry a lot of baggage like that. Even that lady that passed away, man. When she passed away, I was like feeling hard for the family. We took care of the funeral services. Like, I did all the catering for free. Like, and I didn't have to do that, you know what I mean? But I felt for her family, like, it tore me apart inside that I couldn't save that lady. And it made me sad that her family had to go through that too, So I don't necessarily have to carry that, right? Like, I met her when she was already passed away when I met her.
Yeah.
I met her family. So it's like, that's a heavy cross to bear, and carry with you. So it's tough, man. But I'll pick it up gladly because I care deeply for people. And we all know I'm a very compassionate person. Like, there's one word to describe my leadership style, even at work or home or anything, right? It's compassion. I'm a very compassionate person. I think that people know that about me, and they would probably describe me the same way.
No, most definitely. And talking about Annie with cancer and all that stuff, you helping the team, we ended up having your back. Whatever you need, if we got to come in when you got the doctor's appointment, we'll show up. We'll be there.
Yeah.
Whatever you need, take your time. We'll take care of everything that in our hands to take care of. We stepped up. We always had your
Huge.
back. Your family's back. You know me, bro. I always told you that I got you and your family's back. You like.
Always.
So I got your family's back. I know you got my family's back, and you're always gonna help
Yep.
me out. but that's part of the leadership, like you said, compassion and showing love for others. That's what you get out of it, and people
Exactly.
are willing to help you out, in your tough times whenever you need it. I remember that when that situation happened at work, I remember we had a conversation, me and you over there by the side. We just talked about it, you let it out. And you straight up, you already told me, yeah, I'm taking care of the funeral. I'm making sure that the caterings get done, whatever they need. I'm all there. Always having that
Hmm.
conversation with the family, kept going. I remember 2 weeks later, I asked you about it. He's like, oh, yeah, I'm texting him right now. But, showing that part, it's that
Yeah.
kindness, be kind. Remember, you said we talked about it in the first episode when our
That's
enemies,
the other. That's the other quote.
be kind. What's one thing you can give the world? Just be kind. Be kind to
Yeah.
others, But, and like I said, biggest for me, my biggest thing that I always carried was I was the black sheep of the family. I had to be better, and I put all these expectations of trying to be perfect, knowing that I'll never be perfect, and that kind of crushed me down, when I would fail, when all these things would happen, I would always kind of get depressed because I was expecting more, and not being able to achieve it would push me down, and I carried this expectation that I got to be perfect. I got to make sure everything's done, but I ended up realizing that I'm gonna make mistakes, that I'm not perfect, but I ended up learning from everything that happened to me, and sometimes we put too much expectation on ourselves, and sometimes we expect people to do the same for us, and not realizing, it's not always going to be both ways. But that's something carryable, like you said, sometimes your kindness sometimes gets mistaken for weakness. People think just because you're kind
Yeah.
you're weak, until you show them the other side, like, hey, you know, I'm still keep it gangster when it needs to be. We had conversations where you told me stories about it, and same with me. But that's something that sometimes we carry things on our back and we don't let it go, and that kind of pushes it down. But
And that creates a little resentment sometimes towards
yeah,
other people too, because it's like, you ever hear that quote, like, people like you and me don't have people because we're the
yeah,
people that other people have. That creates that mentality. I think that, man, and you kind of get cold hearted sometimes when you take that mentality, because
yep,
you said it. You always expect other people to do for you what you did for them, and
yep,
that's not the way the world works sometimes. So I'd rather be that person somebody needs than have somebody that I need, right? Like, I've always been a very independent person since I was young.
yeah,
Probably stems from that childhood trauma, like I said.
yep,
When my mom left, I've always had this chip on my shoulder, like, oh, now I'm on my own. Like, here we go. Here we go. Like, who am I going to fall back on? And in reality, I got people I can fall back on, man. I got you.
yep,
I got my family. I got my pop, and, I got my brother. I got my sister. I know I got people that I can fall back on. When shit hits the fan, even the guy we were talking about earlier, Patrick, me and him hadn't talked for years, dude. And then one of my best friends, and Patrick's best friend is Tim. He killed himself. He
yep,
committed suicide. Patrick and I hadn't talked in 10 years, dude, and that brought us back together. And I hit him up, and I was like, hey man, let's go see Tim's parents. They went to our church as well. So his parents were pretty incremental in getting me back in church as well. So, we went up and saw Tim's family and went to the funeral services and everything. And we had to leave early because we lived like 5-6 hours away. So we went to the service while the parents were still at church, man, because we're pretty close with the family. We know where the house is and where the key is and everything like that. So we went to the house, man. We went to the grocery store and we stocked the whole fridge with groceries. You know what I mean? Like, we went and spent like a couple $100. That way, his mom and dad didn't have to worry about nothing for a week or two. They could go and not have to worry about going out to the grocery store, and they could kind of seclude themselves while they grieved. And so it's little things like that, man. But I'd rather be that person, that
yep.
gives than takes. So
And you talking about that, saying same over here. My dad taught me to never depend on no one. We live in a world where we expect people to do the same for us, but in reality, like you just said, they're not gonna do it. My dad even told us, one day I'm not gonna be here. I need you guys to figure it out, and be dependent on yourselves. You guys got your brother, my siblings. That, hey, at the end of the day, he built a strong bond with all me and my siblings. We all talk every single day. We send a text. We even got a group, but we talk every single day. Just send memes and all this stuff. But you know, he showed us
Hey,
that.
look at your brother, man. Look at your brother.
Yeah,
Like, when you're going through your bullshit, your
yeah,
brother and me talked. He
yeah,
called me and said, "Hey, man, he's out. His lawyer's asking for this money. All right, how much you need, bro? Like, let's get together. let's get his ass out of there, So, I know you and your siblings got a very close bond, and I've talked to your brother and stuff like that. So, that's the way that your dad raised you created independence, but in creating that independence, he made it to where y'all could rely on each other too.
Yep.
So and that's kind of what we got to do with the vulnerability and breaking that stigma. You need other people that aren't necessarily blood relatives that are still family. Like, you're my family.
Yep.
I got, Patrick's my family. John in Colorado, my best friend, he's my family. We're not friends. Like, those are people you can count on, right?
Yep.
So that's the thing at the end of the day, man. Like, even Carl, I talked to Carl for 45 minutes the other day, man. We get off the phone. Hey, love you, bro. Keep killing it with your kids. Keep killing it with your career. If you need something, let me know. I haven't talked to a dude in 8 months. You know what I mean? Still got that relationship, So I think, you got to break the stigma down. You got to be vulnerable. You got to tell people you love them. You got to help them with the illness. If you see him down, that goes back to those courageous conversations we talked about. Being like, hey, man, pull your head out of your ass. Why are you being Eeyore right now? Like, you can win the lottery and be fucking sad. Like, God damn, man. Like, pull your head out your ass, man. Like, come here real quick. Let me wrap my arm around you. Yeah, we talked about, the emotional intelligence and the EQ. We talked that episode. We got a little deep on that too. Like, you got to see past the, hey, man, how you doing? Oh, I'm good. Like, good? Shit, good ain't great, man. Like, what's up? Come here real quick. Wrap your arm around people, see through that, and really bring them alongside of you and care for each other. And that's how you break that stigmatism of the mental health and get that shit right.
Let's get to the next topic. I like this one right here. It's lonely at the top. Sometimes the higher you go, the fewer people you can talk to. And that to me is big, because like I said, once I stopped doing everything that I was doing, I lost a lot of friends, or so I thought were friends. They were only around while I was out here partying, doing what I was doing. I had a big circle, But once I stopped drinking and I started focusing on myself and locking in, trying to get better, guess what? Everybody was gone. Nobody was hitting me up. No one was sending me a text. No one was calling me. And sometimes they say it's lonely at the top, but it's because a lot of people ain't willing to go where you're gonna go. But when you focus on where you're going, guess what? You always told me you become that 1%. That 1%, and then you start finding people just like you, like-minded, and you guys start building a team together like me and you have. We build a team. We're always working on something. We're always figuring it out, sending each other texts like, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And we're constantly going. But a lot of our friends, associates, they don't want to go where we want to go. They're having fun, It goes back to distractions and the noise, that people ain't willing to go up there with you, And there's one with Snoop Dogg, he says that when you up your standards, sometimes you gotta let people go because your standards up here, and you can't drop your standards back down here just to be leveled with the people, And when you understand that, not everybody's going where you want to go. Everybody can be great, but not everybody chooses to be great. And when you understand that's right there, it's big.
Yeah, and sometimes you're gonna have to leave people behind. That's just what it is, man. If the world's always changing and they want to stay still where they're at, you can't have the dead weight carry you down, man. Whether it's a negative attitude, whether it's a vice that you're using like drugs and alcohol. Like, I got a lot of close friends, man, that did a lot of drugs, did a lot of alcohol. We were close for years, man. That was my group. That's the people I ran with. That was my road dogs. That was my homies. That was the people that I was close knit with, But when I was with those people, I was doing negative things too. Yeah. So as soon as I started getting better, some of those people, they might have animosity because they see me doing better and like, oh, he's too good for me now. It's not that I'm too good for you, man, but I want to see you do better, and you're shortchanging yourself, and I can't respect that. If you can't respect yourself enough to come up, I can't respect you either. So I'd love to take everybody with me. That's the thing. I preach that to you all the time. As soon as you get to the top, extend your hand down. Who you bringing with you? Who can you help? Whether it's that next generation, you see a young buck getting through trouble and drinking and driving and doing drugs and stuff like that. You can tell your story and relate, and you can, talk to them and say, hey, man, look, come here. Let me show you real quick. Like, you're gonna get in trouble. Like, you're gonna lose your life. You're gonna die. You're gonna end up in prison. And you can extend your hand with that story and that personal life experience. And that's something you and I connected with, because I was able to share my experiences with you early on. Say, hey, man, come here real quick. Like, you want to keep looking over your shoulder doing this shit forever, or you want to step into a role where you can make money and change lives and change your life and change people around you, And I think that was good because you've reached out and changed other people's lives, and that's that ripple effect that we've talked about in other episodes too. Change the world by impact of one person at a time. So it's lonely at the top. I agree 100%. But I guarantee there's a lot of people out there that came into my life for a season that are no longer in my life that I could probably still call and say, hey, I need a hand, and they'd be like, boom, I'm on it. What you need? We don't have to talk every day, but I guarantee there's an army of people out there that if I call and say, hey, Ben Davis needs some help, they'd be like, what's he need? Where's he at? How much money does he need? What do I got to show up with a shovel and some duct tape, or whatever it is, you know what I mean? But those are your friends you got to count on. If you have to make that phone call at 3 a.m. because there's a body, there's a select few at the top with you on that situation, so you got to have that 3 a.m. friend. You've heard that before. It's like, who you gonna call at 3 a.m.? So those are the ones that are important. So it is lonely at the top, man, but for a reason. Not everybody can be a leader. Not everybody can be successful. So, that depression and that loneliness comes with a little bit of it. You got to just make your small circle tighter. Work on yourself every day. So it's not all about everybody else. At the end of the day, when we kick the bucket and we pass on and what do you have left? You really got to turn to your faith. You can't take cars to the afterlife. You can't take a house. You can't take these worldly possessions, right? So get right with your heart, get right with your God, get right with your faith, take care of yourself, work on yourself, and you're going to attract what you want in your life. Work on yourself, you're always going to attract everything else that you want.
Most definitely. There's that one saying, the circle got smaller, but the vision got clearer, and when you understand the vision, and sometimes people, when you're focused and locked in, sometimes people just leave because they don't feel, I guess, they don't think the same way you think, and you realize, okay, those people just go away because you're not connecting no more. You were only connecting, could have been for drinking, could have been for smoking some weed, it could have been for any of that type of stuff that they were doing. They don't connect no more, so people fade away. And like you just said, sometimes people say, oh, he thinks he's better than me. I changed my whole life and I started doing other things. I lost a lot of people, but they're like, oh, he thinks he's better than us. Oh, look at him over here presenting and doing all this other stuff. But realistically, I'm better than no one. I'm still the same person, but my priorities got lined up. But let's talk about one of these topics. How do you deal with the feeling of isolation in leadership? It happens a lot when you get into that leadership role. You start fading from everybody. You're in that crowd, but you start going up by yourself.
I think that goes back to the vulnerability again. You have to get vulnerable. Talk to the people below you. Even if you're at the highest part in your company or your life or your career, whatever it is, right? There's always going to be that board of directors around you. You're always going to have that close-knit circle, for that clear vision like you were talking about. So those are the people you need to reach out to and get vulnerable with, whether it's your parents, whether it's your siblings, whether it's, close friends like yourself that have become family, your spouse. But honestly, man, the first person you got to talk to is yourself. You got to have that internal dialogue, and you got to kick that. It's that negative energy, and that comes down to your daily disciplines and what you do with your journaling. What you're eating, what you're feeling, what you're physically doing, right? Because the serotonin, the dopamine from working out and things of that nature. So there's a lot that goes into it. So loneliness, I think you can kick the loneliness if you're working constantly on the other stuff. Like you talked about earlier, when your pops was going through all that stuff in Mexico, it's like you had to work through it, right? Keep your mind busy, keep occupied, and really work it. It's the same thing. If you're lonely, that's because you got time to be lonely. You got time to think, so start filling that void with something positive and replace that mental anxiety with something positive, whether it's working out, whether it's reading a book, whether it's podcasting, whether it's writing.
Have you ever felt isolated because of the role you hold?
Yeah, I mean, being a father, you feel isolated. You got to take care of your kids, being the head of the boss of the restaurant, and leading the whole team of 190 people. You feel isolated because there's certain things you can and can't tell your team too, for the better good of them. You got to kind of filter out what's being said to avoid negative situations. You don't want your team to react in a panic mode if something's wrong. Same thing with your kids at home, right? Like if you're trying to pay a bill and you're like, man, I'm $5 short, or oh, I can't make my house payment this month. I know we've all been in that situation and coming up. It's like you don't want your kids to know that you don't have money for Christmas. So how can I hustle? How can I make money? And so isolation, I think, is one of those mental things that we have to deal with as men, and it's harder because it's different because we're supposed to be the caretaker, we're supposed to be the provider, by nature. So it's like we're naturally isolated. There's things that are on our minds constantly, whether it's a bill to pay or how I'm going to get a certain day off so I can do a certain event with my family, that's important, like a dance recital or a sports game or, anything of that nature. So isolation's real, man, and there's certain things that we attack mentally and we build it up in our head too, to be honest with you. We've talked about those conversations, like when you go to fire somebody and it gives you anxiety on the what if, what if, what if. So sometimes that isolation is self-driven and it doesn't need to be. It goes back to that stigmatism, how we are raised, and that we should be so strong and mentally prepared and we shouldn't have feelings. So isolation for men, it's a hard one because it does create that mental stress that we go through a lot of times till we hit a breaking point or an anxiety attack or we lash out angrily or different men have different ways of dealing with that stress, I think. But if you like I said, if you pray, man, if you journal, if you meditate, if you do something to get that feelings out, put it on paper, talk to a friend, talk to a counselor, whatever you got to do. I think that helps our overall mental health and it helps our physical health and it helps our relationships and everything else around us.
Yeah, the isolation is sometimes I try to isolate, but sometimes when you isolate, the problem gets bigger because your mind just starts going, bro. Your mind starts going, thought after thought, and then you start creating scenarios, and then
Yeah.
this little situation became a big situation, and especially when you start going up higher, a lot of people start being around you because you're the connection, you're the plug, so people want to connect with you just for that fact that they know they can get a benefit from you, like, oh, this person can give me this, so I'm gonna go over there, and it happens a lot, when it happens to a lot of people and it happens to everybody, that people sometimes just come around because they know they can get something from you,
Yeah,
and
all the time.
and you start realizing that, and people start fading away when you start telling people no, and that's a big thing as a leader too, and just in general as a person, you got to understand your boundaries, understand, set those
Oh, 100%.
limitations, and tell people no. And when you start telling people no, that's when you become the villain of everybody's story, and you told me that, you told me that one time, you're gonna be the villain in everybody's story, when you put your foot down and you set those boundaries and you tell people no, and that role start, especially when, being a cook, getting along with everybody, and then I becoming that manager, taking that role, and I can't have that, outside of work. Hey, it's a friendship and everything, but at work, I'm your boss. Let's get this thing going, and people start, like I said, people think you're better than them. Oh, this fool got a manager position. He thinks better than us. Nah, man, I just wanted more in my life, so I went after it. Everybody, we all have the same opportunities. Who's willing to take it? And when you start getting into these roles, you, it becomes more lonely because not everybody, like we just said, not everybody thinks the way you think. Not everybody wants that greatness in their life, and you start, it becomes automatic, I guess. People just start moving on, or you
Yeah.
move away from people.
That's how you can tell who your circle really is, though, is during tough times, you can really tell who steps it up, right? But even in the good times, you can tell who too, because people that harbor animosity, they were never that close in your circle. People that are jealous of you, they say you got to watch your enemies close, but watch your friends closer.
Yep.
Yeah, and they do. They get jealous, they get envious, and that's a hateful emotion to have. That's a very selfish emotion to have. But we talk about that all the time too, and whether it's on podcast or in person or whatever, it's the comparison is the thief of all joy, and that's what causes people to be unhappy because they see your success as them not succeeding. Instead of them clapping for you, they see it as a blow to them. They're like, "Oh man, I could have had that," or "Man, how come I can't do that?" Or "Oh, now he thinks he's better than me." Nah, I don't think I'm better than you. Like I think you're doing great too, man. Like you're in a good spot for what you got going on, man. And someday you're gonna do better. Like I have nothing but faith in you. And so a lot of people don't understand that they can have it too. Like just because I'm successful doesn't mean you can't be successful too. And so I think they see people getting promoted, they get butthurt, they get sad. They're like, man, so and so got promoted. We're all guilty of that to a point. We're all guilty of that to a point because you look around, and you're like, man, why'd that guy get promoted? Like, I'm way better. Or why'd that girl get promoted? I'm way better. And that can affect your relationships even too. You know what I mean? Like, I I put out a book, and it's one of those things like everyone's like, "Oh man, you're an author. That's great. That's great. That's great." But people around me see people telling me that, and it's people that I'm close to, and they're like, "Oh yeah, Ben. Oh, Ben this, Ben that, Ben this." It's like, "Oh, everyone loves Ben Davis." And they get upset, and I'm like, "Why are you hating on me? Like I didn't do nothing. Why are you hating on my success?" And I don't even feel like I'm that successful. So why are you hating on me? Like, go get your own. I'll help you get it. Let's go do it. Let's make something for you. Why you coming in my lane? All upset and butthurt. Like let's clap for each other. I'd love to see you succeed. What do you need from me? How can I help you? So it is isolating, but I think it's a natural emotion as well. Envy is a real thing. People get envious and people get jealous, and it's not even that they hate you as a person. They wish it was them sometimes. Like you see someone win the lottery, like, damn, I wish I won the lottery. That must be nice. But it goes back to they don't see those struggles, they don't see the vulnerabilities. So I think if we break that stigmatism and people see what you've gone through to get to the level that you're at now, it helps bridge that gap of the envy and the comparison, right? Like if you read about my backstory and you see what I've come through from my childhood through my teen years to my 20s and 30s, and you see all the stuff that I've done, whether it be in trouble with the law or drugs or a friend overdosing or a suicide or my wife having cancer or being divorced from my ex-wife or whatever, like you see all those trials and tribulations, you can't look at my success and be like, oh man, he's so lucky. Like shit, I work for this, bro. Like most of y'all won't even last half the shit I've been through. You know what I mean? So it's like it's an envious thing. But if you fill in that backstory, I think that the vulnerability and me telling my story and getting it out there in this next book that I just put out, I think it'll help people have a little more mental clarity. Like, oh, he's not just lucky. Like he's had to work his ass. He's had to claw and grit and get down and dirty and roll his sleeves up to make it where he's at. And so I think we can kill some of that envy and that comparison, that jealousy by sharing our stories and sharing our trials and tribulations and getting vulnerable and talking about that mental health that men go through and that isolation that men go through.
And let's get into the next one. Why is it so hard for leaders to ask for help?
Man, because we want to know everything, right? We're always the smartest guy in the room. Leaders got to have all the answers. And so in that stigma, that's a stigmatism in itself. That the leader has to be the say all, do all, be all. Where good leaders are very talented with the EQ that we talked about, the emotional intelligence, and that's bouncing off everybody, right? I tell people this all the time. I've trained so many managers in my career, and I've promoted so many managers in my career. And one of the things that I like to tell every single one of them is like, I love having you here. We're about to get another MIT, manager and trainer coming in on November. And my favorite thing about getting MITs is that I'll learn from them. They're brand new in this position, and I sit down with them and I'll be teaching someone and I'll ask them a question and they'll blow me away, and I'm like, dang, I've been doing this for 25 years and I've never heard that. Like, let me write that down. That's a little gem. I'm going to steal that. Thanks for sharing your insight with me. That's awesome. I love it. So I think leaders a lot of times put a lot of pressure on themselves to know everything. We got to react fast, and I think good leaders have less pressure because they rely on their people, whether the people below them, whether the people next to them, whether they're board of directors. It could be someone that's not even in the same business with you. It could be someone, like leadership with the purpose too, right? Like that, my first book that I put out, Elevate the Art of Purposeful Leadership. It talks about leading with purpose, and one of the things that I talk about in there is building your relationships and networking and having that connection with people and that emotional intelligence. So, and that's every facet of life. That's not just work. That's your home life. Like what's your relationship look like with your wife or your kids, or what's your relationship look like with your parents or your boyfriend or girlfriend? That's leadership too, and that's vulnerability, and that's getting to the point where you can admit when you're wrong. Like you and I talk about all the time, like if I can't trust you, I can't work with you. And integrity, that goes back to admit when you're wrong. And if you can admit when you're wrong and you don't have all the answers, you can release some of that stigmatism and that pressure of being a leader too.
Yeah, like you just hit it right. Sometimes we don't ask for help because so it could be our pride, our ego too. That we think that, oh, I can't ask for help because they're gonna think I'm weak, or they think I'm dumb. But reality, you really think about it, all these successful millionaires, billionaires, they're not the smartest person. They have the smartest people working for them. Why? Because they're good at one thing, but they're gonna hire other people who are better than them at this other stuff to do their work. Because they need those people.
Yeah.
You in a team, you gotta have people that are better than you at different things. And understanding that we might not have the answer, but hey, we can go find the answer. You might ask me a question. Well, hey, you know what? I don't know that answer. That's a great answer. Let's go figure it out. And
Yeah.
show 'em, like, hey, sometimes people need to know that. Well, I'm not this person that knows it all, but hey, I'm willing to learn. I'm teachable. I'm coachable. That you can come and we'll both learn something together. And that doesn't make you weak, but sometimes it makes it. I guess it makes you connect with your people more. That okay,
Makes you smarter. Makes you
yeah,
smarter. That
that
means you're leading through other avenues. You look at all the most successful people in the world, they all had coaches. You look at Michael Jordan, or Kobe Bryant, arguably the best NBA players of all time, right? And they had Tim Grover, who was their trainer, right? They didn't do that alone. Tim Grover had them on a strict diet plan, a workout plan. He would break down how many breaths they would take, on how many steps they would take. So the most successful people in the world, they have coaches too. So why try and conquer anything alone? You can't get anything in life without your people, right? And I've told you that many times too. Like, you cannot do everything alone, period. But you hit a really good point a second ago. It's hiring people that are great at things you're not good at. There's two philosophies out there, and a lot of people try and work on what they're not good at, right? So you're going to be not good at this. You're going to work on it. Okay, now you're average, right?
right.
Me personally, I don't believe in that. My philosophy is very different from that, and my philosophy.
Yep.
I personally work on the things that I'm good at, so I can be freaking awesome at them, the best at it. The things I'm not good at, I hire someone else for that shit. Because why would I work my ass off to become average? Like, I would rather work my ass off to go from good to great. You hear jack of all trades, master of none. So I can work on the things I'm not good at, or shit, I'm gonna save my time and I'm gonna pay you to do that. And I'm gonna work on the things I'm really good at. Now as a team, we can collaborate. And now we're really strong force. Now we're really good because I can do what you can't do. You can do what I can't do. We make a whole team, cohesiveness, pulling in the same direction. There's no goals we can't accomplish.
Yep.
Whether it's launching a podcast, or whether it's hitting numbers at work, or it could be buying a house, right? Like, you didn't know how to buy a damn house. When you and I started messing around talking and stuff like that, you had no idea how to save your money, and your credit looked like shit, you know but that's something I knew about, and I was able to coach you and be like, hey man, here's what we're gonna do. Here's how you're gonna get a house. Next thing you know, you're buying a house, you're buying a car, you buying, your credit's off the charts. Your
Yep.
mama's looking at you like, damn one, how'd your credit get to 800?
Yep.
you know
And there's another one that says, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. You don't want to be the smartest person in the room.
Hell no.
You wanna learn from people. If you're the smartest person in the room, guess what? You're not learning nothing no more. That's when you stop learning, because what are you gonna learn from the people that are around you? Nothing. You want it might sound dumb, but you want to be the dumbest person in that room. Why? Because you're gonna learn from every single person, and you're gonna pick everybody's mind, and that's gonna be part of your mind. And then when you level up, you go to another room that's smarter people than you, and that's how millionaires become millionaires. You read all these books, they talk about it. You want to go to the rooms where you might not know nothing, like you just said. I didn't
Yeah.
know how to get my credit better. I didn't know how to buy a house, but hey, you know what? Hey, I want to buy a house. What do I got to do? You broke it down for me. Okay, I hit up a realtor. Hey, bro, I'm doing this, and that. This is the loan I want. This is stuff that I want. Boom. Guess what? Next thing I know, my credit starts going up. My credit starts going up. I didn't know none of this stuff, but I went to ask someone that knew about it, and I learned
Exactly.
about it.
Well,
And
they say the loudest man in the room is not always the smartest man in the room either. The
correct.
guy doing all the talking isn't the one, right? So
Yep.
God gave you two ears and one mouth for a reason. So shut up and listen every now and then. Maybe you learn something, and then you can apply it. Next thing you know, you're the one passing that information down to somebody else.
Correct.
We didn't all wake up and, oh damn, I'm smart today. right?
Yeah.
We all go to school. My son asked me, "Oh man, why am I in school? This is a waste of my time." He's in all honors classes. He brings a report card home today. It's all A's. He's like, "This is a waste of my time." I'm like, "Well, it is now because you're in seventh grade at a ninth grade level. You know, you're smarter than most of the kids in your class because you apply yourself. You know, and you try when you're there. But someday, you know, if you stop working and everybody else keeps growing, they're gonna run right past you. You're gonna have a ninth grade level while everyone else is getting a college degree." So
Yeah.
I got to break it down to him like, look, man, like you may be the smartest kid in class right now, but at 4 years from now, if you stop trying, everyone else is going to pass you by. So sit down, shut up, listen, learn, keep it rolling, and level up. Like you said, always try and get around people that are smarter than you. Always try and get around people that know more than you because that's how you learn. Then ask questions. Good leaders learn. They know what kind of questions to ask.
Yeah. Let's go with this. What's something you wish more people understood about being in your position, bro? I know everybody wants to be in your position, but there's some things people don't know, bro. And me being that manager, when you would step out, I'll step up, and then I'll realize I send you the text. Hey, bro, I don't know how the hell you do this, bro. I'm like, this is crazy, bro. I'm getting texts 3 in the morning, bro. People hitting me up and all this stuff when I'm trying to go to sleep, and I gotta wake up early in the morning. Handling all these issues that are going on in work and trying to figure it out. And I sent you that text, hey, bro, I don't know how the hell you do this, bro. Like, damn, sometimes it gets a lot, and people don't
It
see,
does.
you know.
It does. I think that goes back to watering the grass in your yard. The grass is not always greener elsewhere. And every skill you have that you've come up with in life, right? Like you didn't just wake up and you kick ass at something. It just
Yeah,
doesn't happen. Now, there's a difference between natural born talent, right? And then learning something and discipline to get better at it. There's talented people that have certain things that they're blessed at, right? Like I can't read music for shit, dude. I'm not a musical genius. I couldn't sit there and break down bars for you. I can't play an instrument. I can't read sheet music, but if I picked it up, could I probably do it? I could probably learn it, through some discipline. I have no doubt I can do anything if I apply some discipline and some work ethic, but it's not my thing. But when my position, I wasn't always that good. I started like you. I started with late night conversations with people and like, I don't know how you do it, and getting in those rooms that we just talked about of people that know how to do that and asking questions. And that goes down to the stigmatism again about the vulnerability and the mental health, and admitting when you've been defeated or admitting when you're like overwhelmed, like, man, I'm overwhelmed. Like, I don't know what to do. That's when you start calling that board of directors and people that are higher in that room and other people that know and have been there, right? Because we've all lived through work experiences and life experiences and things of that nature. So we have to be able to differentiate what we know now because we should know it and what we know now because we haven't learned it yet and we need to have that experience. There's no shortcut for experience. You just have to you have to go through it. You can't just jump from A to Z. Like you
yeah,
have to learn the ABCs first,
yeah,
right? So uh things that I wish people knew about my position is that you're never going to be perfect no matter what position you're in. You're going to make mistakes. You just have to own it when you make a mistake and learn from it and move on and not do it again. So, just like your position or just like any other position out there, and that could be your family or whatever. Like, we're all, even as parents, like I'm a first time parent. I got 4 kids, man, and every one of my kids is different. So it's not like I learned something with Bella that I can apply to Madison because they're different personalities. What worked for Bella won't work for Madison,
yeah,
or Carter and Tristan. They're different people. And that's the same thing with business. You have to treat everybody differently. So one thing that I would tell people about my position is specifically like let's talk about work, for example, that they don't see what goes on behind the scenes. Right? They might see, oh, Ben's in the office. Oh, he's never doing anything. He's doing well, yeah. I've been in the office for an hour and a half because I had an HR issue I had to deal with, and I had to interview 10 people, and then I had to type up notes, and then I had to send it to other people, and then I had to get feedback from them. And then I had to come up with a resolution. That shit takes a minute.
yeah,
Would I rather be working on Expo and selling steak and potatoes? Hell yeah. That's what I got in the business to do is sell food and make people happy. It's all that behind the scenes stuff. And then a lot of people they don't come into work till 3 o'clock, right? My day's already 8 hours in by 3 o'clock. So you don't see what I've done, whether it's vendors or crawling up someone's ass because they didn't pick up my trash today, or calling a eco pest or a pest control company, and saying, hey, I need you out today. This is what I saw, or Getting the parking lot redone. Like we just got the parking lot redone, and people are like, "Oh man, it looks really good." Well, yeah, no shit. Like it took me 7 months to get that done. They don't see those things. So again, you got to focus on your part of it, right? Um, the way I look at a team, and this doesn't matter if you're a family, cohesive team or a work team or a religious team at church, and you're leading a youth group or whatever. All teams to me are like spokes on a wheel, right? Every spoke has a purpose. If that spoke is out of line, that tire's out of balance. Your team's out of balance. So you got to know your role, stay in your lane. It's got to be crystal clear. And that's when it goes back to like our last episode, we were talking about vision. Everybody's got to know the vision, go the way. And that's what I tell people about my position, specifically in a leadership role, is know your role. I know my role. And if you're going to question it, like, hey, follow me, young buck, come here. Let me show you my role for a minute. Walk in my shoes for the next 2 hours, right? Come here real quick. And as you said, you've done it. You've stepped up and had that leadership role when I'm out of the building. It's like, hey man, I'm on vacay. Figure it out.
Yeah.
Call me if you have to, but figure that shit out. And you know, to be honest, you were pretty good at it because you were quick at making decisions. Now sometimes you made some dumbass decisions, but a wrong decision is better than no decision. And I coach everybody that because you're either going to get it right or you're going to learn from it, right? I mean, we're serving steak and potatoes. You ain't going to kill nobody. We're not doing neuroscience. We're not doing, you're not the doctor or anything like that. So you mess up. All right, cool. Hey, man, here's what we're going to do next time. Did you learn? Yeah. All right. Don't do that again. But the people that have the inability to make a decision, that's the ones that really kind of hold you back and hold themselves back. Like just make a decision and roll with it. It might be the right one. Cool. Now you get kudos, you get a pat on the back. Might be the wrong one. It's like, oh, don't do that again. And I do that every day, man, because I go from 0 to 90 real quick. I got, one of my mentors will tell you that all the time. Like I see green and I go. There's no second thought. There's no questioning it. So I think that in my role, there's a lot of pressure, and I think people don't see behind the scenes a lot of that stuff. And that's like that anytime you level up. Anytime you level up, no matter what you're doing, whether it's a sport, whether it's a job, whether it's your career, whether it's your family, whether it's your relationship, anytime it gets hard, I feel like you level up. And that's the whole purpose of that book that I just put out, right? It's literally called Beyond the Fall, My Journey Through Second Chances. So every time I fucked up in life, or every time I was like going through something that was like life altering, and I thought it was the end of the world, right? It wasn't the end of the world because I learned from it, and now I can pick myself up, brush myself off real quick, and get back to it.
Yeah, let's go with healing while leading. Sometimes you have to lead while you're still healing, and as a leader, it's big, like we just talked about it, just you might be going through a lot of stuff, but you might be still healing, but you can't show the team that because guess what? The team eventually it's gonna rub off on the team, and the team's gonna be in the same, mindset as you are during that moment. And sometimes we gotta, still heal while we're trying to go through this. Like I'll give an example. When I was facing my case, I was kept on hearing 8 years in prison, 8 years in prison. I just showed up. I just showed up to work like nothing was happening. I didn't tell no one my charges or how many years I was facing. I just showed up to work and I was just doing my job. A lot of people would have just broke down and started crying and giving up on life because I'm about to get 8 years in prison. I just showed up. I did my job and going through that process and trying to figure it out. Even when I never told no one I was in pain when I had the bag on. My back was killing me, bro. I never told no one. I just worked. I didn't stop working. And sometimes you gotta heal through that process and just keep on leading. Your people need you sometimes, and you gotta be that person right there to keep on leading the team for that win. And keep on going.
I think even during situations like that, though, like, because you say you didn't tell anybody, but I knew, right?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, hey, man, get it, dude. So it's not that nobody knew, the right people knew,
Yeah.
right? It's not you did a good job of differentiating who needs to know and who doesn't need to know. And that's one of those things where we have to filter out some of the noise depending on the level that you're at, whether it's your career, your relationship, or whatever. There's certain things that people don't need to know because all it is noise and it's clutter. It's going to throw them off, right? So they don't need to know your back hurts and you out of bag and you're hurting and you can't work because then they're getting unmotivated too. So you look at that situation, like even your case that you beat, right? And that you did. You and I had a conversation. You can't even tell me like, man, I got 8 years. I'm like, all right, cool. You got three options, man. I said, you can go do 8 years, and go to prison, get your shit done. come out. Said, or you can start working on this stuff before the judge hands it down. Say, hey man, hit that drug and alcohol class. You start doing your community service. Go volunteer, get a breathalyzer in your car before they mandate it, right? And work through it and show good faith to the judge and say, hey, look, this is what I'm being proactive. Here's what I'm doing. Here's what I'm working on, right? Or the third option is just roll over and quit,
Yeah.
you know, and you either die, you go to prison, or you fix that shit, you know, and
Yeah.
that's the conversation you and I had, right? And so you did it. You did the smart way. You know, you started doing community service before you even had your first court date. You know, you showed up and you're like, hey, look, I got 8 drug and alcohol classes already logged, right?
Yep.
And they took all that into effect. So when they handed down a sentence to you and the probation and stuff like that, they were able to turn around and say, hey, Juan, you know what? Good job, man. You already did this, so we're going to give you back time on that,
Yep.
right? And so that kind of saved your mentality at the same time because you got ahead of the game. So it was like it was less impactful when the judge handed down a sentence because you're like, cool, man, I'm half done with this.
Yep.
So then you could put it on a counter and be like, all right, man, I'm almost there. I'm almost there. I'm almost there. And that's the same thing that I coach personally in leadership is that proactive mentality. Like, all right, how are we going to fix it, right? Like you can roll over and die, you could quit, or you can just get up and stop groveling, stop whining, get your shit together and start working, you know? And so I wouldn't say that you told nobody, right? And I think that you were vulnerable enough to tell the right people, and those people kicked you in the ass and say, hey man, this is what we're gonna do. Here's how you got to do it, right? And that was motivation, inspiration for you to turn around for your specific story and be like, yeah, you're right. Psh, get after it. Let's go. You know, instead, because if you went to some of those other people that used to be in your circle, you might have been doing 8 years right now. Don't worry, big homie, I got you. I'll put money on your books. All them people would have disappeared. It'd have been 4 years later. You'd be like, Juan, who's Juan? I don't know that guy. You know, and you can relate to that with your cousin. You know what I mean? So, I mean, how many people you think still rocking with your cousin that back in the day? You know what I mean? You think they're putting money on his books? No, he's probably found a new circle, right? He's got a new circle where he's at. And he's got some family that stuck around because they're blood family and stuff like that. But it's impactful for everybody. You know, even in a situation like Annie's cancer and stuff like that. Like she could be a fighter, you know, or she could roll over and be like, I'm not doing chemo, I'm cool with dying. She could go and do chemo and just give up on life and let it break her. Or she could show up every day, do the chemo, live for her kids, live for me, and put that ambition and drive behind her why. So it goes back to the why. We talk about that all the time. You gotta have purpose, you know. So when we're talking about elevate leading through the art of purposeful leadership, you know, that it breaks it down for that, you know. And it's one of those things where you can apply those messages in that book specifically to situations like this, and you can talk about vulnerability and get down to it, and just know you got a circle around you, and make sure that you're talking to the right people, you know.
Most definitely. We got two more questions. How can a leader normalize mental health conversations in the organization or community, bro?
I think it's just temp checking, you know, it's that EQ, it's that emotional intelligence, man. So you got to be able to see through the bullshit when someone says, "Oh, I'm fine." Fine's a ticker word for me. You say fine, I'm like red flag. That automatically you say fine, that's like a red flag to me. Oh, you're fine. Come here real quick. So I think you got to normalize it by talking about it. You know, so I could tell you like there's a young man that works for us. I won't say names or anything like that, but he was going through some real dark times and he was contemplating suicide and things of that nature, right? Because the things he was going through in his personal life, pretty dark shit, to be honest with you. You know, and he didn't talk about this with the staff. You know, everybody else sees him as like bubbly, fun, you know, go lucky kind of guy. But he was fighting some demons and he doesn't show it to everybody. But I got that face that people just want to tell me everything. I don't know what it is, man. I must be like the most approachable human being on earth or something. Because people will tell me shit that I don't want to know sometimes. I'm like, oh, too far, too far, too far.
Yeah.
You know, like let me out this conversation. But you know that young man was talking about, you know, his suicide attempt and how he tried to kill himself and things like that. And you know, instead of shying away and be like, oh, that's weird, man, go get some help. You know, I sat down and I talked to him. I let him cry it out. You know, I teared up. I didn't actually cry, but you know, it touched me because I've been in that personal situation. You know, it goes back to that stigma where, you know, I've thought those thoughts before, man. You know, I've been there. I was probably patient zero for Zoloft back in the day. You know, they used to pay me instead of me paying them. They're like, yeah, we'll give you $50 a week. Take this little blue pill. You know, so I've been there with that mental um illness and depression and things of that nature, man. So it's Normalizing those conversations, and it goes back to those courageous conversations like we were talking about in the last episode, being able to normalize it and not make it weird, like, and not make it one of those situations where you shy away from it. I think a lot of people shy away from it because they don't know what to say.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't need to say shit. You need to just shut the hell up and listen. Sometimes all they need is a listening ear, man. Let them get it out. Give them a pat on the back. Hey, man, it's gonna be all right. It's gonna be all right, man. Like if you need something, I'm here for you. Hey, I know you're depressed right now, so instead of drinking the bottle and hitting the bottle at 2:30 in the morning, man, hit me up. Give me a call. Give me a text. Or shoot me a phone call. Let's go to IHOP real quick. They open 24/7. Let's go grab a cup of coffee, man. Let's just talk it out for a minute. Would I rather wake up at 2:30 in the morning, go have a cup of coffee with you, than get a call at 6 a.m. that you killed yourself? Hell yeah. Like let's go have some coffee real quick. So I think the stigmatism is out there, but we need to open our eyes with the emotional intelligence and be able to connect with people. Be empathetic. We talk about empathy a lot, and so really touching people's hearts and knowing them for who they are, not just a number. We talked about being invested in your people, whether it's their family, their kids, their personal life. So that's how you break through that stigmatism. You normalize those conversations, and you get real vulnerable, and you live through your experiences and relate to people, and that's how you start saving one person at a time.
Yeah, it's definitely being able to just open it up, because I feel like in the world we living in today, a lot of people need it. We need to open it up not just for the community, but as well as your job. People just letting it out because we don't know what the kind of demons people are facing every single day. Sometimes we think our
Hmm.
life is bad, but there's someone out there going through worse than we are.
Worse, yeah,
And
yeah.
sometimes being able to listen to people and letting people let it out, let just like you just said, sometimes they just want to hear, let it all out so they can feel better. And if maybe you've gone through that process and you can give them some advice and tell them, hey, you know what, let's do this and that, and let's make sure everything gets better. Hey, if you need anything, send me a text. Hey, if you need anything, call me up. If I'm always gonna be here if you need anything, and that's very important to be able to, break that. You just said, break that little stigmatism that we got that people think that we need to be these strong people, but sometimes just let it out. That
They feel like they gotta fight it alone. Everyone feels like they're alone. All they need is somebody in their corner. And that might just be one person. If you got one person giving you that, right? Like I can tell you, me personally, like when I was going through shit like that, there was one person that I couldn't let down. And I knew that if I killed myself, that person would be heartbroken forever. And that's my dad. My dad. And I talk about it in that book. The one that just came out. I talked about a situation when I was about 7 years old, and I was walking home from school, and my stepbrother at the time was just annoying the shit out of me, dude. Like, I'm walking home, he's walking behind me, like copying me, doing stuff, and I turned around, popped him, threw him down on the ground, beat him up a little bit, and got up, and I was like, oh shit, I shouldn't have done that, because now I'm gonna go home, I'm gonna get in trouble. So I didn't want to go home and face the consequences from beating him up. So what I did is I ran away. I was 7 years old, man. I'm in like first grade or something at that point, first or second grade, and I ran away. I didn't come home till probably like 7:30 at night. So my parents were freaking out, right? And they're like, they're freaking out because they're worried about me. 7 years old, they can't find me, so they're not mad that I beat up my brother. They're just terrified they lost their other kid at this point. So I get home, and my dad was explaining to me, like I worried him. He was upset because he was worried, not because he was pissed that me and my brother got in a fight. Siblings fight. That happens all the time. We can get past that. But the fact that I was missing broke his heart, and then I was at the kind of a vulnerable point at that time, man. 7 years old, you got high emotions, right? My mom had left by that time. I hadn't seen her in 2, 3 years. I just beat up my brother. I ran away from home. I was hating life. I was an angry kid, mad at the world. I remember telling my dad, I don't want to live anymore. I want to die. I want to kill myself. And, I said it over and over and over. And finally, that was, you talk about never seeing your dad cry and stuff like that. That's the one time I remember my dad crying ever in my life. Never seen him cry except for that one time. And I was talking about it as a kid, like, I want to kill myself. I want to kill myself. And it broke my dad's heart. And from then on, every time I had a suicidal thought the rest of my life, whether it was in my teenage years or whether I was using drugs or whether I got fired from a job or whatever it was, I'd hit that depression mode. And it's like, as soon as I got to that point where I was like, man, I want to kill myself, or even having those dark thoughts, right? I would start thinking about my dad, and I get very emotional because of that one situation. And I'm like, that it broke him. I didn't even kill myself. I just talked about it. and it broke my dad. And I couldn't do that to my dad because I love him and respect him too much to bring myself to actually pull the trigger or do something of that nature. You know what I mean? So it's a pretty raw story. Pretty vulnerable. Just saying that even on this podcast, right? But I can tell you, man, that situation shaped who I am today, and it helped me because I can't even tell you how many people I've saved from suicide because of situations like that. And one of my best friends killed himself because he was in the trouble with the law. He shot himself 6 times in the chest and had an open casket because he wanted me and my friends to see his face, and not go down that same road. So, suicide's a very hot topic for me. My buddy Patrick, that's not my story to share, but you're listening to his podcast earlier. He's been through his mental health and stuff like that, and he's a person that me and him connect, and we talk about things like that as well. And he's tried to kill himself too, and so it's like it's a real thing out there, especially for young men. And right now in the nation, the average teen between 12 to 15 boys. That's the most common suicide in the United States right now. 12 to 15-year-old boys, and that scares the shit out of me because you know how old my sons are. 12 and
Yeah,
15. You know, yeah, dude. So it's kind of crazy, but so you got to normalize it though. You got to talk to your kids. You got to talk to, but I find that it's a lot less common in kids that have faith. If you take your kids to church, it's less common because they can let that feeling. They feel like they don't have anybody in their life. They can let it out to God. They can pray. They can get that feelings out. And then other people that are very close with their family. But you'll see people like Robin Williams that killed himself. Funniest comedian ever, right? Funny dude. His goal was making other people laugh, and so often it's hidden behind a smile. So you got to be able to read those tickers and connect with people with that EQ and that emotional intelligence, like we talked about before. It's wild, but that's the
yeah.
only way to do it.
And you're saying Warren Williams, but there's a bunch of people, that I believe the dude from Lincoln Park, same thing. He was smiling.
Yeah,
There's a bunch of people, a bunch of actors that were happy on the outside, the external, but not the internal.
hmm
But people were smiling, happy. Next thing we know, hey, this person committed suicide, and it's a big thing. Me and you connect because we've gone through so much and we've gone through the same things. Same thing with me. My biggest thing was I said it during the interview that I had. If I die today, who is it going to hurt most? It's going to hurt my family more than it would have,
yeah,
impacted anybody else. So I learned to love life a little more. Understand that. You know, I keep going strong because I don't want to break down my family, and I'd rather just keep on living, facing my battles, and understand that at the end of the day, it just made my connection with my family even stronger. That I was able to
yeah,
talk to them and let it out. I've talked about my sister. My sister, my oldest sister. That's the person I go to with anything's going wrong with me. I call her
yeah,
and we'll have a 2 hour conversation. Sometimes even 3 hour conversation where we'll just talk about it and I'll let it out, and she'll tell me what she's going through. But I like to tell my family that we grew up in a household where it wasn't about that. We didn't tell each other we loved each other, but we knew we loved each other. But now
yeah.
we understand that life's too short. Why not tell each other, hey, what, I love you, take care, I'll talk to you later, and just let it out. But that's the podcast for today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. You guys liked it. I'm gonna leave you guys with this little quote right here. It says, "The strongest leaders ain't the ones who never struggle. They're the ones who face their battles and keep showing up with the heart and humility." It's something big. We all
Humility is
face
a big one.
we all face battles, but go with your heart. Show humility to people and show, like you said, bro, be kind. It doesn't hurt to be kind. But with that being said, if you like the podcast, share it. Let people know. Let people. Maybe someone's out there going through these battles that we're talking about today, and it can help them out. But with that being said, we're out. Peace.
You guys have a good night.